So we're in our Bible study series, and if you remember last week, what we're trying to do is to take broad strokes over the top of the whole Bible to give us an idea, a kind of framework of some of the themes that run through it. And that way, if you have very specific, detailed biblical knowledge, you'll have a framework to hang it on. And if you don't, then you have a good idea of what you will expect when you go into it. This topic, the seed of the serpent, was probably one of the first things I ever read. And as a very young boy, and I can't remember how old I was, but I think I was around 10 or 11, when I had my first Bible from my mom. I remember starting in Genesis, and I got stuck on Genesis 6, and I was fascinated with who were the Nephilim. What did that mean? Who were the giants of old? So this is a topic that I've looked at and I've studied many times over a long period of time. And I'm very excited about this, and I'm also very disappointed that the Bible colleges do not want to touch this subject. But I'm going to show you just how this theme runs all the way through the Bible and why it's important for us to know this. So, Jay, run clip 1.
A few months ago in church, Junior Anderson heard the story of David and Goliath for the first time.
And David chose a small rock, put it in the sling, and with a great whoosh he let it fly, and down fell the mighty Goliath. Now, the important thing I want you to remember, children, is that there will be giants for you to fight in your lives too. Yes, Junior?
Did you say that I'm going to fight giants?
Yes, metaphorically speaking, of course. Yes, Junior.
What does metaphorically mean?
That means that your giants will be problems in your life, like temptation or sin. Yes, Junior?
To be clear, there will be giants, yes, no.
You bet.
That is so awesome!
And that was the day Junior learned that he would meet his giants.
So that's a cartoon that the girls enjoy to watch. It's actually really neat. But that encapsulates where the Bible colleges are on, and the modern interpretation of where they are on this whole giant topic. So let's get back into Genesis where we were last week. If you remember, last week we looked at the seed of the woman, right, which was the promise. It was the reuniting of God with mankind through that promise that ran all the way through, which Jesus fulfilled in every detail. But this is the other part of the story that we don't want to talk about. So there's the Nakash, he's the enemy in the garden. The fall has already come about. God is cursing him to put him from an upright being down onto his belly. And he says to him, and I will put enmity, you will be at odds with, you will be enemies with the seed of the woman and your seed, your offspring and her offspring. And he, the seed of the woman, will crush your head, and your seed will strike his heel. So what that means is, the moment the enemy heard that first prophecy in the Bible, he is keenly aware that he has to stop the seed of the woman, right? Because the ultimate seed of the woman is going to crush his head. We fast forward then to Genesis 6:1-4, and it says, now it came to pass that men, when they began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and that they were beautiful, and took wives for themselves, all of whom they chose. We touched on this before, sons of God. We're going to look at it in more detail next time, but they are angels. But most of the Bible colleges in the modern interpretation would say that actually they are sons of Seth. They're a human line, But you'll see we'll get into all sorts of trouble later on when we don't accept what the Bible says about angels and human beings and the interaction between the two. And this was, I'll just tell you now, that this was the historic view of the early church. It's only recently the modern view that they're not talking about angels. But we'll look at this term, sons of God, next week. So it was fallen angels taking wives. It says, the next part of the scripture there, it says, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his days shall be 120. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bore children to them. Those were the mighty men of old, men of renown. So the offspring of the angels were the mighty men of old. And it says there that they were men of renown. That means that they were infamous, right? The stories were all about these characters. But look here. So the enemy immediately goes and starts to mess with the bloodline of the woman, right? This is what he's done. He's made a corruption to them. And God, the first bit that God interacts and counters that is said, okay, my spirit will not strive with man for more than 120 years. And we know in the beginning, even at this time still, there are people that are living to 800-900 years old. But God says, why does he do that? He does that because he limits the possibility of more incursion between the angels and the offspring of human beings. He limits their lifetime. So Genesis 6:5 then, and Genesis is amazing. This is a book that you can read, but really meditate on every sentence, because there is nothing lost when you look at it. So Genesis 6:5, it says, then the Lord saw. There is a gap between what has just happened and this verse here. He says, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. There has been a gap here. So the angels have been interacting with human beings. There's a lot of offspring. There's hybrids running around. They were the giants, what the Bible calls Nephilim. And we get to a point here in the future that there is only evil thought of by man. And God decides he's going to judge mankind, right? He's going to send a flood. He's going to wipe them all out. Isn't it interesting that he even says that he's going to wipe out the animal kingdom? Isn't that strange when you think about that? You think, wow, that's extreme. We're going to look at that next week. Why was that? But he wanted to wipe the slate clean. Genesis 6:8 says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Why was Noah different? It says, this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. The word perfect, the Hebrew word perfect, is tamim. It means a perfect bloodline, uncorrupted bloodline. It's used, and every time it's used in the Old Testament, it's referring to the animals in sacrificial terms. It means that it's uncorrupted. Its bloodline is uncorrupted. It is a pure, spotless example of an animal. So God, when he looks at Noah, he's not looking at him perfect as in he's sinless, because we know that's not true. He's looking at him because his bloodline has not been corrupted by what? By the offspring of the angels, right? So he says, okay, this is the family I'm going to use. The flood happens, and God then after the flood destroys everything, and he makes, in verse 18, makes a covenant with Noah, and that is, so he starts to define then where the seed of the woman will come, through Noah, and then obviously it's going to be through Abraham. But look at this, go back to Genesis 6:4, it says, there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. All of the people that study this topic call this the second incursion. They say it happened again after the flood. It wasn't done yet. That angel offspring is not finished with, and we're going to see why and how they get that idea, because in the Bible colleges they will say, well, Nephilim is only mentioned twice in the Bible, which is true, but it's also misdirection, because we'll see that there are many other terms for Nephilim in the Old Testament. So Nephilim means, it comes from the Hebrew word nephal, which means to fall. It means fallen ones, fall, mighty ones. And a lot of the English interpretation take the word gigante, giant, from that, but that is just an attribute of what they were. It wasn't that in itself. We're not just talking about people suffering from gigantism, the overproduction of growth hormone. It wasn't that. They were real giants. Interestingly, Holliday's Hebrew lexicon interprets Nephilim as produced by miscarriages or thrown out of heaven. Gigantic early population of Palestine. So when we want to look at other biblical sources, we often turn to Flavius Josephus, right? The Jewish historian back in those early times, and he wrote of this topic, "For many angels of God accompanied with women and begat sons that proved unjust and despisers of all that was good." So that's where we get the term legends of old, men of renown. That's where we get all of our Babylonian, Greek, Roman pantheon of gods, right? Small g gods. So when you read of Prometheus, people know Prometheus, right? The god of fire. Do you want to pull that slide up, Jay? There's a picture there. That's Prometheus. The next slide. That's actually Prometheus outside the Rockefeller Center in New York City. That is the most visited statue in New York City. Prometheus. The next one is, and his character is interesting because he was a friend of mankind, right? He gave mankind fire in direct opposition to Zeus, which was the king of the gods. And you can see parallels with the stories there. And also this one I thought I'd mention, which was Pandora. So Pandora was the first woman created by the small g gods, and she was given gifts, and one of them was the box, right? That she was told not to open. Don't open the box, don't open the box. What does she do? She opens the box, and she unleashes all the evil of the world through that. So all of these stories that we have that have been categorized as myths are actually just talkings. It's just a remembrance, the old remembrance of these characters that were here walking around on planet Earth. And if you imagine, they were giant in strength, and I should imagine if they had angel DNA, which they did, they were far above what we could imagine. So they were the heroes of old. They were worshipped as gods. That's where we get the concept of small g gods from. So what we get then is we have Noah, we have the covenant with Noah, we have in Genesis 12, 1 and 2, fast forward to Abraham, God says, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, and go to a land that I will show you. We looked at that from the seed of the woman. So the enemy is looking and he's paying attention. He wants to crush the seed of the woman. So he's interested now. He realizes, okay, the Lord's going to use Abraham as part of the seed line that he's going to be working through. And in verse 5 it says, then Abraham took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and they departed and went to a land of Canaan. And that was, of course, the promised land that they would eventually go back into. So the enemy hears that. What does the enemy do? The enemy gets real busy inside of Canaan. Genesis 14:5 This is just a little bit later on. This is Abraham. This is Lot gets kidnapped, if you remember that story. This is what they refer to as the Battle of the Kings. Look at this, in the 14th year of Chedorlaomer, and the kings that were with him came and attacked the Rephaim in Ashtaroth, the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in Shaveh Kirithaim. All those names there are races of giants, and we'll look at that in a moment. So this already, the enemy's gone into the land of Canaan, and he's doing the same thing with the angels and the daughters of men. If you remember what happened to Abraham, Abraham has Isaac, Isaac has Jacob, Jacob has 12 sons. One of the sons, Joseph, gets taken down to slavery into Egypt. They eventually follow him there because of a famine. Then Egypt is gone. God raises up Moses because they're enslaved, and then Moses delivers them out and they land in the wilderness, right? The 40 years of the wilderness before they get to the promised land. And in Numbers 13, look at this. It says in verse 28, nevertheless, this is the outlying areas of Canaan. This isn't even in Canaan yet, but it's flowing out of that area. Nevertheless, the people who dwell there in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. And Numbers 13:32, it says, and they gave the children of Israel a bad report. You remember the 12 spies? They go into the land, Moses sends them, 10 of them come back with a bad report. What do they say? They say, the sons of Anak are there. They're as tall as cedars. We look like grasshoppers in their sight. So many of the commentaries tried to just do away with this and imagine that they were just faithless. No, they said even that their cities are fortified up to heaven. What does that mean? There were giant walls. Everything was huge. Do you remember the grapes they brought back? Do you remember that? The grapes they brought back on the pole, and they said the grapes were the size of pomegranates. Wow. So even the stuff of the land was giant, and we'll go into that next week. Look at this, Deuteronomy 1:28. Where can we go up? Our brethren have discouraged our hearts, saying the people are great and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. Moreover, we have seen the sons of the Anakim there. The Anakim were another race of giants. They were infamous. Look at this, Deuteronomy 2:9-10. Then the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab. Do not contend with them. This is even before they get into the promised land. For I will not give you any of their land as a possession, because I've given heir to the descendants of Lot. The Emim had dwelt there in times past, a people as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. They were also regarded as giants. And Deuteronomy 2:19, and when you come near to the people of Ammon, do not harass them, do not meddle with them. I've given that land to the descendants of Lot. And then in parentheses it says that was also regarded as a land of giants. Giants formerly dwelt there, but the Ammonites called them the Zamzummim. So how big are we talking about? When we're talking about giants, how big are we really talking about? Look at this, Deuteronomy 3:11. This is way after now, but it says, for Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. So he was one of them already, one of the last of the giants. Indeed, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. 9 cubits is its length and 4 cubits its width, according to the standard cubit. So some say a cubit is from the tip of the finger to the elbow is 18 inches. Some say it could be as big as 25. But if you worked on 18 inches, the bed is 13.5 feet. It's a big bed. And in the time of David, obviously we all know this story, 1 Samuel 17, and a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He was 9'5". And interesting, he took 5 stones, right? Not because he thought he was going to miss. Goliath had 4 brothers that we know about, and they were later killed later on. Here's an interesting thing here. 2 Samuel 21:20, it says, "Yet again there was a war at Gath, and there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot." That was one of the identifying gene types of a giant. He had 6 fingers, 6 toes. And it says he also was born to the giant. So let's have a look at the name. Let's have a look, actually roll that clip, Jay. So what do we know today? What have we found today? And this is just a small section of what has been dug, what we've catalogued since the 1500s. So there you had a couple of clips there. We have records of fossilized human skeletons being as big as 30 feet. Some say even 36 feet. 36 feet. And all sorts of different variations of them in between. But if you look, and we know so many of the stuff, anyone who's studied this topic, and I would encourage you to maybe, if you're interested in this topic, you could look at Steve Quayle's work, L.A. Marzulli, Tom Horn does a lot of work in this area, and a lot of the people that find these things legally, you have to let the antiquities department know, and very often a lot of the stuff just disappears, and they find it very frustrating that a lot of evidence just gets squirreled off somewhere and is not made available to the public. But even that, even the stuff that we know of, we know that there were we know that there were physical remains of giants that we've documented. Let's look at the names quickly. In 2 Samuel 5:18, it says, "The Philistines also went up and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim." So we have 6 different names, or 5 or 6 different names here. We have the Nephilim, which means the fallen ones, to fall. We have the Rephaim, which comes from the root word Rapha, which means spirit or shade. We have the Emims, which means proud deserters. Isn't that interesting? The Zumim, which translates as roaming things. The Zamzumin translates as evil plotters. They were a wicked race of giants, and they were worshipped as gods, and they were followed by human beings. And the word Anunnaki, if you know anything about Sumerian history, would set bells off in your head, because they were a group of deities that came to this planet and apparently seeded the human race. That's according to their mythology. What I find interesting, following this line of the seed of the serpent, is that there's been a battle between what God has tried to do through the seed of Eve, all the way through to Jesus, and what the enemy has done, trying constantly to stamp out that promised one that was going to come. And that has carried on even through to today. Now you might say, well, we are post-Christ, so what does this matter? What does it mean for us today? And I believe that what we've done is to mythologize big chunks of the Bible. We've decided that we're not going to touch those topics because they're in the realms of mythology. And what we've done, whether we've done it deliberately or not, is move that whole field into the same category as the classics. But I believe at some point in the future, history is going to be rewritten when we find more evidence, or we're given more evidence as to how these massive monoliths were built all over the planet, why they built them. They're going to uncover some things, and they're going to drag the whole topic out and rewrite our history as we know it. And the Bible's going to be in there, but they're going to They're going to rewrite that in a way that's going to be part of the coming deception. But what does it mean to us today? We live in what they call the transhuman era. Does anyone know what transhumanism means? It means beyond human. They call it human 2.0. There are people out there now with huge budgets that are wanting to evolve humanity. They believe we're evolved, but they want to speed up the process by using technology. And I want to show you a couple of things here. And just bear in mind that isn't it interesting that Jesus said that when he comes back in Matthew 24:37, he says, but as in the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. Why did he say that? It goes on to talk about marriage. They were given in marriage and they were feasting and carrying on. And some of the scholars look at it and say, well, he's just talking about marriage. But why did Jesus mention Noah? Of all the generations he could have mentioned, he could have said in the times of David. And he also mentions in another passage, as it was in the days of Lot, and we'll look at that next week. But why is it's so interesting that he mentions Noah himself and everything we know about Noah, if we accept that the angels came down to the earth and had relations with women and produced these superhuman beings. Let's have a look at this image number 1, Jay, or one of the first slides of the images at the end. So this is 2012. This is 10 years ago. Does anyone remember during the Olympics that there was a big story in the press about genetically modified athletes? Anyone remember that story? That the Americans were getting mad at the Chinese because they thought, wait a minute, something's going on there. We know that they're messing around with human beings to make them faster, to make them stronger. And this is what's going on. And don't believe that it's just China doing this. Look at this next slide. This also is almost 10 years old. Anyone heard of super soldiers? Yes. Genetically altered human beings to make them more than human. That's what they would call transhuman. The trans bit is just the transitionary phase between being non-human. That is the purpose, that is the goal of where we're going in this world at the moment. Look at the next one. This is old too. This is an old story. The first baby being born with 3 parents. Do you remember that? And they messed around in the lab with that. This is the future as we find more technology is making us sterile. The future for children is artificially bred children. This is what they want to do. This has got 3 parents. Isn't that interesting? 3 parents. And the next one, Jay. Did anyone see this? Look, this is old too. This has got to be 10 years old. They took a cat, they took jellyfish genes, they inserted the genes into the cat, and in Japan you can buy a cat that glows in the dark. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that back then they did it with simple biology, just the act of a man and a woman coming together. But now we have gone beyond that. We don't need to do that. We don't need to have physical giants on the earth for evidence of what's going on. We have things going on in scientific labs now which are so frightening that it actually threatens the very future of us as human beings. And my point is, if this is going on, and if you can blend different genes from animals, which we know that they're doing, and different species together, when does it cease to be a human being? That is what we need to ask ourselves. My personal opinion, it's just my personal opinion, is that the coming mark will be some kind of DNA upgrade. If it were just a chip, you could dig it out of your hand, right? You remember people talk, oh, it's going to be the chip, it's going to be the chip. Maybe it is going to be the chip, I don't know. But I feel that that is something that you can remove. The Bible is very clear that once you take the mark of the beast that's coming, you will not be able to undo that. You have destined yourself for destruction because you cannot undo that process. And I would argue that it's probably something genetic. And one last point I'm going to make is, just please hear me when I say that the new vaccine types are not a mark of the beast, right? I'm just saying that right out front. I do not believe they're a mark of the beast. But the new type of vaccine technology, which they call mRNA, the M stands for what? Messenger. What's another word for messenger? Angel. Angel DNA. Angel RNA. Angel. Why did they call it messenger? You could have called it many things, right? But why messenger? And I believe that we are moving in a direction which most of the general public has no idea the magnitude of this road that we're on. And next week we're going to have a look at the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, and we're also going to have a look at just how far we've come down this road of corrupting the human DNA. And we are on they've already said, listen, this is a Pandora's box that's been opened. We cannot put this back in. We cannot do it. And their mindset now is just move forward, move forward. Let us pray.